I came back from a weekend trip with my son, and there was a $250 fine taped to my front door because the rental car I parked in my own damn driveway wasn't pre-approved. Next weekend, different car, new fine. By the third one, I realized this wasn't about the car. It was about me. You ever hit that point in your life where everything feels like it's finally starting to come together again? That was me. For the first time in a long time, I could actually breathe. I'd just come out of a brutal divorce. Nothing dramatic like you see in movies, no plates thrown or affairs or court battles. Just slow emotional corrosion. We got married too young, and when life started doing its thing, we realized we were practically strangers. She left, and for a while, I felt like someone pressed pause on me. I got the house after the split, but let's be real. That house wasn't just real estate. It was my line in the sand, my clean slate, my all right, we start here kind of place. I work in IT. Freelance consulting mostly, which means I do a lot of remote stuff from home, and every now and then I'll fly out for client projects. Nothing glamorous, but it pays well, and I don't have to play office politics or pretend I care about team-building retreats. Plus, it gives me time with my son, Ethan. He's 12, smart as hell, way cooler than I was at that age, and has this laid-back sense of humor that sometimes makes me forget he's still a kid. Ethan stays with me every other week. It's the best part of my life, hands down. When he's with me, everything revolves around him. We do road trips, we build ridiculous Lego sets, we try food trucks with names like Taco Apocalypse or the Waffle Rebellion. We're a good team. That's why I started renting cars on weekends. It became our little thing. Sometimes it was an SUV to hit the hiking trails. Sometimes a sporty convertible just to cruise up the coast with the top down and music blasting. Other times just a rugged Wrangler for camping trips. It made the weekends feel like a mini vacation, even if we didn't leave the state. I'd pick him up from school and say, "Guess what we're driving this time?" And his eyes would light up. It became a ritual, one of those small, stupidly meaningful traditions that don't look like much from the outside, but from the inside, they hold everything together. So yeah, renting cars was part of how I dad, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted those memories to stick. You can't do that in a beige sedan you've had for 10 years. When I bought the house, I made sure it was in a decent neighborhood. Safe, good schools, not too far from Ethan's mom, so the logistics weren't hell. I knew it came with an HOA, and yeah, I read the documents. I knew the basics. No pink houses, keep your trash bins tucked away, no zombie flamingos on the lawn. Fine, I wasn't planning on turning my place into Burning Man anyway. At first, everything seemed normal, quiet, peaceful. People waved. They had dog walking groups and community potlucks and all that suburban stuff that looks good on brochures. I kept to myself mostly, but I wasn't a hermit. I showed up to a couple meetings, helped carry a neighbor's groceries once, kept my lawn clean. I was just trying to be a good, low-maintenance part of the neighborhood. And then there was Karen. The first time I met her was at one of those community BBQs they host every few months. You know the type. Someone's grilling hot dogs, there's a bounce house, somebody brought potato salad that looks questionable. I was standing by the cooler trying to figure out if the beer selection counted as an insult, and she walked right up to me like she'd known me for years. "Hi, I'm Karen," she said, with that tight smile people get when they're trying to look pleasant but don't actually enjoy other humans. "You're the one who moved into 212, right?" I nodded and said, "Yeah, that was me. We're so glad to have you here. Just make sure you review the bylaws. Some people think they don't apply until they get a letter. We try to be proactive here." Then she just kept smiling, like the threat was baked into the teeth. It was subtle, polite, and loaded as hell. That was my first Karen experience. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just one of those type A people who needed to feel in control of everything. Every neighborhood has one. I figured if I followed the rules and didn't draw attention, we'd stay out of each other's way. I had no idea how personal she was about to make this. For the first few months, everything was fine. I rented different cars almost every weekend Ethan was with me. I'd park in my own damn driveway. We'd load up our gear, hit the road, come back tired and sunburnt, and I never got a single complaint. Not even a passive-aggressive note in my mailbox. Then, out of nowhere, I got a letter. Not a warning, not a, "Hey, just a heads up." A straight-up violation notice with a $250 fine. Unregistered vehicle in driveway, not compliant with HOA regulations. I thought maybe I'd missed something, so I pulled out the HOA documents, and yep, there was a line about registering vehicles regularly parked on the premises, but I figured that meant long-term stuff. Like if I had a roommate or a live-in girlfriend with her own car or something. This was a weekend rental. Less than 48 hours. I parked it, drove it, returned it. Done. Still, I didn't argue. I went on the portal, submitted an appeal, explained the situation, that it was a short-term rental, not a permanent resident, and I didn't think registration applied. A week later, appeal denied. All vehicles, regardless of ownership status, must be registered prior to entering HOA-controlled areas. Whatever the hell that meant. Fine. Next weekend, I rented another car, a Range Rover this time. I registered it through their system ahead of time, did everything by the book, thought I was being clever. Still got a fine. Late registration must be received a minimum of 72 hours prior to vehicle arrival. That line wasn't in the original docs, so I checked, and sure enough, they'd updated the guidelines on the HOA website, buried under 3 submenus with a timestamp of that very week. They were moving the goalposts in real time. I started to get this pit in my stomach, that feeling like someone's watching you, not just in the creepy way, but in the intentional way, like someone's waiting for you to slip just so they can pounce. I didn't realize it yet, but Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was hunting, and apparently I was her new favorite target. I remember because Ethan and I had been planning that weekend trip for weeks. We were going up north to this little off-grid campground we found online, just the 2 of us, a couple sleeping bags, and a whole lot of bad cell service. I booked the Jeep a few days ahead, packed everything into 2 duffel bags, made sandwiches the night before, and honestly, I was in a good place. That kind of rare piece where your to-do list is empty, your email is quiet, and your kid's excited just to hang out with you. We came back dusty and sunburnt and smelling like campfire. I parked the rear of the Jeep in my driveway like I always do, carried our gear inside, and started unloading the cooler. Ethan was already on the couch, half asleep, still wrapped in his hoodie. Then I saw it. A plain white envelope taped right to my front door. No note, no explanation, just that sterile HOA logo in the corner and my name printed underneath like a threat in Times New Roman. Inside was a violation notice. Unregistered vehicle observed on premises, non-compliant, $250 fine, must be paid within 14 days to avoid additional penalties. I just stood there for a second, read it twice, thought maybe I was missing something. I mean, it was a rental, a temporary weekend vehicle. I didn't park it sideways across someone's lawn. It was in my own damn driveway. At first, I figured it was a mistake. Maybe Karen was out walking her dog, saw a different car, didn't recognize it, assumed it was some rando squatting on HOA property. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because that's what normal people do. They assume mistakes are just that, mistakes, not warning shots. So I wrote a quick message through the HOA portal, polite, respectful, not accusatory, explaining that it was a weekend rental, parked less than 48 hours, and absolutely not a violation under any reasonable interpretation of the rules. I even thanked them. I don't know why I thanked them. Some weird part of me still believed that acting like a good neighbor would actually matter. A few days later, I got the response. Karen's name was all over it. Dear Mr. Daniels, while we appreciate your explanation, all vehicles parked within HOA boundaries are subject to registration, including short-term and rental vehicles. This policy ensures the safety and uniformity of our neighborhood. Your fine remains valid. Further violations may result in escalated penalties or legal action. Legal action, for a Jeep, for taking my son camping. The worst part wasn't even the fine, it was the tone. That "we appreciate your explanation" corporate smile that hides the dagger. The part where she tries to sound fair, like this was a misunderstanding, while also twisting the knife and making it clear I was already guilty, not just of breaking a rule, but of challenging her. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at my phone, rereading that message, and something just clicked. This wasn't about safety, this wasn't about policy, this was about control. Karen wanted me to know she was watching, that she could hit me financially, that she would, and that fighting back would only make it worse. She picked her moment perfectly, too. Just a little jab. Not enough to blow up into a war, but enough to make me flinch. Enough to make me hesitate the next time I wanted to rent a car or take my son somewhere new. I could have just paid it and moved on. That's what most people probably do. Just eat the fine, roll their eyes, and avoid conflict. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, it felt like paying that fine wasn't just about the Jeep. It was about surrendering to something bigger. It was about letting someone like Karen decide how I live in my own home, what kind of father I get to be, what kind of memories I'm allowed to make with my son. So I appealed. Again. This time, I printed out the rental receipt, highlighted the dates, quoted the HOA's own documentation, and sent everything in a neat little PDF. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I played by the rules hard enough, the rules would actually matter. But instead of a response, I got silence. No email, no message on the portal, nothing. And then, a week later, I came home from work and found the second fine taped to my door. Different car, same punishment. Same cold, calculated signature at the bottom. Karen Whitmore. That's when I realized this wasn't just a warning. This was the opening move. And Karen had just taken her first step onto the board. The next few weeks were like a weird game of HOA whack-a-mole, except I wasn't the one holding the mallet. I was the mole. And Karen was playing for blood. After the second fine, I started getting letters. They came in manila envelopes, always printed on that same stiff, smug HOA letterhead, like it was supposed to make the nonsense inside seem more official. One of them accused me of patterned vehicle behavior inconsistent with residential standards. Another said that repeated use of temporary vehicles may indicate non-residential usage of property, and warned that commercial activity is prohibited. I wish I were kidding. She was trying to make it sound like I was running some kind of bootleg car rental business out of my driveway. Like I had a lineup of tourists rotating through my guest room and driving around in random Jeeps and Land Rovers. I called the number on the letter, got voicemail of course, and left a calm, direct message. Hi, this is Mark Daniels at 212 West Briarwood. I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding these fines. I don't run any business from my home. I'm simply renting vehicles for personal use with my son on the weekends. No response. Next weekend, I didn't even rent anything. Just drove my own car and stayed local. I figured maybe if I laid low for a bit, gave the whole thing time to cool off, Karen would move on to someone else's flower beds or mailbox height. Instead, I got a violation notice for non-compliance with previously issued vehicle infractions. No new offense, no new rental. Just a fine, because the previous fines were still under appeal. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This was about compliance, about submission, and I wasn't giving her what she wanted. A few days later, I came home from picking up Ethan and saw something that actually made my stomach turn. My driveway was blocked. Someone had parked their car right behind mine, not across the street, not slightly overlapping. Fully boxed in, bumper to bumper. I couldn't pull out if I wanted to, couldn't even open my trunk. It was a dark blue Volvo SUV, new, clean, no one I recognized. I walked around it, checked for a note, nothing, no explanation, no apology, just silence. I called the tow company listed on the HOA website, told them there was an unauthorized vehicle blocking my driveway. You know what they told me? We'll need HOA approval before we can remove the vehicle. You'll need to contact your HOA president. Of course I did. So I did. I emailed Karen. Subject line, blocked driveway, urgent. Her reply was less than 3 sentences long. The vehicle belongs to a guest of another resident. Please remain patient. Parking is shared and communal. That was it. She was flexing. She was literally weaponizing other people's guests just to make a point. Ethan was inside trying to finish a school project on the kitchen table while I stood on the porch trying to wrap my head around what just happened. I didn't move the Jeep, I didn't argue, I just sat down on the steps and stared at the street. And I realized something. Karen didn't care about vehicles. She didn't care about driveways or rentals or bylaws. She cared about control, total control. The fines started increasing. First it was $250, then $500, then $750. The last one came with a red stamp that said final notice, which made me laugh out loud because at that point it felt like there was no such thing. They'd always find another notice, another way to squeeze. And the timing of everything? Impeccable. Every time Ethan was with me, I'd come home to something. A notice, a letter, a phone call. It was almost like she was waiting for him to show up, like she knew that's when I'd be most vulnerable, most easy to push. Then came the email from the HOA legal rep, not even a human name, just a firm. They were acting on behalf of the HOA to collect on unresolved violations. They cited some clause buried deep in the covenants about continued noncompliance being grounds for further legal action, including liens. I had to read that part 3 times. Liens. They were threatening to put a lien on my home, for rental cars, for weekends with my son. I called the number, got voicemail again, left another calm message. Nothing. Then my mailbox disappeared. Yeah, that sounds crazy. But one morning I walked out to grab the mail and it was just gone. Post and all. Clean cut at the base like someone took a goddamn saw to it. No windstorm, no car accident, just vanished. I reported it to the post office. They shrugged and said I needed to install a new one or I wouldn't get mail. I put up a temporary one of those cheap plastic ones with a flag that never quite stays up, and 2 days later it was knocked over, dented, useless. Karen, of course, denied everything. Said maybe it was teenagers or wildlife or weather-related. And anyway, she reminded me technically that kind of temporary mailbox wasn't compliant with HOA standards. My mail stopped showing up, bills went missing, packages were delayed or returned. It was chaos, controlled chaos. Then the real kicker came, a glossy little flyer from the HOA in my mailbox the day it was finally upright again. Community compliance focus areas for the quarter. Right there on the list, bolded, vehicular behavior and driveway usage. Driveway usage. They made it sound like I was abusing my own concrete, but what really made my blood boil was the quote at the bottom of the page, under Karen's name. In great communities, order is peace. That's when I knew she thought she was the hero. She believed she was saving the neighborhood from me. And she wasn't done, not even close. It was only a matter of time before she stopped playing chess and started flipping the whole damn board. I really did try to handle it the right way. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't trying to stir up drama. All I wanted was to live in my house, spend time with my son, and not feel like I had to hold my breath every time I parked in my own driveway. That's it. That was the bar. Basic peace. So I started documenting everything. Photos of every rental, dates, times, license plates. I kept receipts, screenshots of the HOA website before and after the policy changes. I printed the original bylaws I got when I bought the house and highlighted the exact section Karen kept twisting. I even screen recorded my vehicle registration submissions through the HOA portal to prove I was doing it correctly and on time. It felt ridiculous, like I was prepping for a court case over Jeeps and Toyotas. But that's where we were. Then I wrote a formal appeal, a long one. I laid it all out. The fines, the changes in policy, the conflicting language in the documents. I cited specific passages, added attachments, even included a polite paragraph saying I respected the role of the HOA and hoped for a resolution that prioritized neighborly understanding. It was a well-worded, respectful plea for sanity. No response, so I went to a board meeting. They hold them in the rec center by the pool, folding chairs, stale coffee, the smell of chlorine lingering in the air. About a dozen people usually show up, most of them just there to be seen, not to actually say anything. I waited for the open comment section and raised my hand. Karen gave me this thin smile, like she already knew exactly what I was about to say, and nodded. Mr. Daniels? I stood up and kept my voice calm. Explained the situation. Emphasized how often I had complied, how unclear the new rules were, how unfair it felt to be targeted for behavior that was never once flagged in the past. I said it was starting to affect my son, that I just wanted clarity. When I finished, there was silence, and then Karen spoke. Thank you, Mark. We appreciate your input. Unfortunately, as you know, vehicle compliance is essential for neighborhood safety. These rules are not personal, and they apply equally to everyone. If you feel they're being misapplied, we encourage you to consult your own legal resources. This forum is not for legal challenges. Then she moved on to the next agenda item. Just like that. I stood there for a second, not angry, not yet, just stunned. She hadn't even pretended to engage with anything I said. It was like talking into a mirror and expecting sound to bounce back. I sat down. The woman next to me patted my arm like I was a puppy who'd just gotten neutered. After the meeting, I waited until Karen was packing up her papers and walked over to her. I didn't yell, didn't threaten. I just asked, "What do you want from me?" She looked up at me, all polite steel. "I want consistency," she said, "and accountability. That's what this neighborhood was built on." Then she walked away. Next day, another fine. Same rental process, everything submitted on time, still got hit. So I called a lawyer, not some bulldog type, just a local guy named Sean who handled real estate disputes and small HOA claims. I met him through a former client and he agreed to do a consult. He read through everything, took notes, sipped his coffee like a man who had already seen way too many versions of Karen in his career. Technically, he said, she's operating in a gray area. The original bylaws are vague. The board has broad discretion to interpret and amend policy. The updates they made aren't illegal, but the way they're enforcing them? That could be challenged. I asked him what that meant, realistically. He said, "It means you could fight this, but it'll cost you. Time, money, stress. They're hoping you'll get tired before they do." He offered to draft a cease and desist letter, just to put them on notice, nothing aggressive. I agreed. A week later, the HOA replied through their legal rep. One line, no fluff. All actions taken by the board fall within the governing documents and will continue as such. I filed a complaint with the city. They shrugged. Said HOA matters were civil disputes. I tried the state HOA ombudsman's office. They offered a pamphlet and a suggestion to pursue mediation. I filed for mediation. Karen declined to participate, said the matter was not in dispute. I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, which was a mistake. I wasn't angry, just factual. I laid out what had happened and asked if anyone else had experienced something similar. Within an hour, the post was taken down by moderators. I got a message saying we do not allow divisive content that could harm the harmony of our community. Harmony, that word again, always used by people who are perfectly fine with you suffering as long as you do it quietly. I called a few neighbors directly, ones I'd waved to, chatted with in passing. Some of them were sympathetic, especially the ones with kids. But every single one of them said the same thing in one form or another. I just can't afford to be on their radar. That's when it started to feel really lonely, like I was screaming underwater and nobody could hear me. Or worse, nobody wanted to. Even Ethan noticed. He's not dumb. He saw the letters, the warnings, the tone in my voice when I talked about the neighborhood lady. One night after dinner, he asked, "Are we in trouble?" I said no, but it tasted like a lie. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the back porch for hours trying to talk myself out of everything. Maybe I was making it worse by fighting. Maybe I should just stop renting the cars, cancel the trips, take the train, do something simple. Maybe it wasn't worth the damage. But then I thought about Ethan, about how his eyes lit up when we'd get a new car for the weekend, the way he'd climb in and immediately start checking out the buttons and gadgets, how it became our thing. And I thought, no, I wasn't going to let some petty HOA tyrant decide what kind of memories I'm allowed to make with my son. That line in the sand I'd drawn when I bought this house, I wasn't ready to erase it. But the truth was, I didn't know what to do next. I'd tried everything that made sense, all the adult, legal, rational steps, and they had all failed. That was the moment it really sank in. This thing was bigger than I thought. It wasn't just Karen. It was the structure behind her, the silence that protected her, the system that let her smile through every injustice and still sleep at night. I wasn't just losing a battle, I was losing ground, and I had no idea what was coming next. It all shifted because I needed a damn screwdriver. I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, one of those stupid little things that only takes 5 minutes to do, but only if you have the right bit. I didn't, and I was too stubborn to run to Home Depot for a single number 2 Phillips. So I texted Susan. Susan used to live 2 houses down. She moved out a couple years ago, but we'd kept in touch, mostly because she and her husband had been the first to invite me over after the divorce. They were the kind of people who kept extra tools, extra beer, and extra folding chairs in their garage, just in case. She moved to Arizona after her husband passed, but she still owned a few rentals in the area and came back from time to check on them. That weekend, by total chance, she happened to be back in town. I told her I'd stop by for 5 minutes. We hadn't talked face-to-face in forever. When I got there, she was already on the porch, iced tea in hand, wearing one of those wide-brimmed garden hats that make everyone look either wise or slightly unhinged. She handed me the screwdriver like she'd known I'd come for it. But she didn't let me leave. "You look like you've been through a meat grinder," she said. I laughed. I guess I did. I'd been walking around with this low-grade stress hum in the back of my head for months and probably didn't realize how visible it had become. I told her everything. The cars, the fines, the mailbox, the meetings, the Facebook post, all of it. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out this old, creased folder, the kind that's seen the inside of more than one filing cabinet and smells faintly like toner and broken promises. "Karen's been doing this for years," she said. She laid the folder on the table and flipped it open. Inside were copies of HOA meeting notes, violation letters, emails, even handwritten notes from other residents. She tried to get us fined because our back fence was painted a different shade of taupe than the approved color palette, said it interfered with community aesthetic flow. My husband almost blew a gasket. I flipped through the papers. There were names I recognized, stories just like mine. One couple got fined for having a small U-Haul trailer parked in front of their house for 2 hours while they unloaded furniture. Another guy got threatened with legal action because he installed motion lights that were too bright for community cohesion. And then she showed me the one document that made my entire body go cold. It was a copy of an original HOA policy draft from years back, one of the very first documents that set the foundation for all future changes. It was dated and signed with Karen's name on the bottom as a witness. Buried halfway down the second page, there was a line that read, "Short-term vehicles, defined as less than 72-hour usage, are not subject to advance registration or penalty, provided they are parked in designated residential driveways." It was clear, simple, not up for debate. I stared at it like it might disappear if I blinked. "Where did you get this?" I asked. She smiled like she'd been waiting years to be asked that. Back when we were getting harassed, I demanded full transparency. I filed public record requests, dug through everything, took copies. Karen never thought anyone would keep them. I figured one day someone else would need them more than me. I just sat there. This whole time I thought I was drowning in policy, that Karen had the rules on her side, but she hadn't just been manipulating the rules. She'd been violating them. Every fine, every letter, every threat, all of it was built on a lie, or at least a deliberate omission of truth, and she knew. She had to. Her name was on that draft. She'd helped write it. I took pictures of every page, every note. I scanned the documents into my phone before I even left her porch. My hands were shaking the whole time, but not from fear, from adrenaline. Because this wasn't just a lifeline. This was leverage. This was proof. Not a hunch, not a feeling. Proof. And that wasn't even the craziest part. Before I left, Susan leaned in and said, "You should ask Karen about the wedding van." "What wedding van?" She rented a 12-passenger Sprinter for her daughter's wedding last spring, parked it in her driveway for almost a week, never registered it. I have a photo somewhere. And just like that, the pieces snapped into place. Karen had broken the same rules she'd been crucifying me for. Worse, she'd done it in public with a massive commercial rental in plain sight of the entire neighborhood. No fines, no letters, no threats, just silence. Because when you control the system, you don't get punished. You get exceptions. The hypocrisy was almost laughable, except it wasn't funny, not after months of being treated like I was some kind of delinquent for taking my son on weekend trips. This was it. The moment the lights came on. The moment I stopped thinking I was losing and started thinking maybe I had a real shot. Not just at getting the fines reversed, but at burning the whole damn charade to the ground. I drove home gripping that screwdriver like it was a sword. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where to aim. I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where something inside you just flips. Like you've been swallowing crap for so long, you forget what it feels like to stand up straight. And then someone hands you the one piece of truth that hits you so hard in the chest, your whole spine just snaps back into place. That's what those documents did to me. I got home from Susan's place with my heart pounding like I'd just outrun something dangerous. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't anymore. That fear, that tension, that constant second-guessing, gone. It was like someone opened a window and the pressure finally had somewhere to escape. I didn't sleep that night. Not in the anxious, restless way, but in the focused, dialed-in way. I sat at my kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee and started mapping everything out. Because now I had something. Not just an opinion or a complaint, but real, tangible proof. I had the original policy draft. I had the clause, I had Karen's signature, I had dates, I had the wedding van. I just didn't know exactly what to do with it yet. So I started from the beginning. I pulled every fine I'd ever gotten and logged them into a spreadsheet. Dates, descriptions, amounts, screenshots of my rental receipts, photos of the cars, notes about when I submitted the registration forms. It was the most organized I've ever been about anything in my life. Which is saying something because I do IT consulting for a living and my brain is basically a filing cabinet with trust issues. Then I matched them up against the policy Susan had handed me. Line by line. Every single fine was in direct violation of that clause. Every one. And the thing that really lit the fire under me, though, was the date. The document was dated before Karen became HOA president. She wasn't just enforcing this stuff. She came in after the rule was already written and deliberately acted like it didn't exist. Either she buried it, or she knew most people would never bother to read past the first couple pages of HOA documents. And you know what? She was right. Most people don't. But I do. Especially when I've got skin in the game. Especially when my kid's looking at me, waiting for answers I've been pretending I had. So I reached out to Sean again, the lawyer who'd helped me with that cease and desist letter that went nowhere the first time. This time, I didn't just show up frustrated, I showed up armed. I handed him the original policy draft, the folder, the photo of Karen's wedding van. I even printed out a frame from a neighbor's Instagram story that showed the damn thing in her driveway with streamers on the mirrors. I'd messaged the guy and asked if I could use it. He said, "If it gets her out, be my guest." Sean read through everything, one eyebrow raised higher than the other, and said, "Well, this just got interesting." That's lawyer speak for, oh, they messed up bad. He laid out my options. We could file a formal complaint with the state's Department of Real Estate. HOA oversight falls under them here. We could send a second cease and desist, this time with the documentation attached. And if we really wanted to turn up the heat, we could draft a letter to the full board, outlining exactly how Karen had violated the governing documents, and how every fine she issued under that policy could be grounds for liability. But he also said something else. You've got evidence. But evidence isn't what wins. Narrative does. You want the board to turn on her? You need to make this personal for them. That stuck with me. Because Karen's power wasn't just in the bylaws, it was in perception. She'd built this image, the calm, collected neighborhood guardian, the woman who ran community events, kept lawns in check, sent out the monthly newsletter with those god-awful clip art borders. She looked harmless, reasonable, official. I needed to crack that image, not with rage, not with conspiracy theories, but with truth. So I started collecting stories. I reached out to the neighbors Susan had mentioned, a couple who'd moved to a smaller place across town, a guy who'd installed solar lights and got fined twice in the same week, a woman whose husband had to repaint their front door 3 times because the HOA kept changing its approved palette without notice. Not everyone wanted to talk. A few did, and the ones who did, they were mad, not in a revengey way, in a worn-out way, tired of walking on eggshells in their own homes, tired of being treated like tenants in a neighborhood they own. I didn't ask anyone to go public, not yet. I just gathered what I could. Emails, notes, messages, snapshots of their own violation letters. All of it went into the folder. Meanwhile, I started watching Karen closer than I ever had before. She walked her dog at the same time every morning, took the long loop around the neighborhood with her phone in hand, pretending to scroll, but occasionally stopping to take photos of people's driveways or fences. I caught her once across the street, squinting at a neighbor's recycling bin like it owed her money. She was still doing it, still on patrol, still convinced she was saving the neighborhood from itself. And here's the kicker, she had no idea I had anything. That was the power of it. She still thought I was just another problem to squash, another guy who'd make a fuss for a few months before going quiet. But I wasn't quiet anymore, so I worked with Sean. We drafted a full complaint, not just against the fines, but against Karen personally, for violating the HOA's own governing documents, selectively enforcing policy, and weaponizing her position for personal control. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a warning shot. And we didn't send it to Karen, we sent it to every single member of the HOA board. Certified mail, copies hand-delivered to their doors. One of them even messaged me afterward. I had no idea this was happening, thank you for the heads up. And just like that, the plan was in motion. No more silence, no more hoping she'd get bored and move on. I wasn't waiting anymore, I was aiming. The letters hit the board like a brick through a stained glass window. I didn't hear anything right away, no instant replies, no dramatic fallout, but I knew they landed. You could feel it. It was like the energy in the neighborhood shifted a little. People started looking up when they walked their dogs. Nods were a little longer. Eye contact lasted a beat more than usual. Something was moving beneath the surface. Then Karen blinked. She didn't call, didn't email. What she did was pure HOA. Sterile, cold, performative. She filed a violation against me for publicly distributing defamatory content about HOA operations. Apparently, sending certified letters to board members with proof of her hypocrisy counted as defamation now. That was the angle she went with. It made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. She wanted to flip the narrative, make me the aggressor, frame the whole thing like I was some bitter resident out for blood, trying to smear the hardworking folks keeping our neighborhood safe. But this time, I didn't panic. I countered her claim with an addendum to the complaint, added the new violation letter right on top like a cherry on a cake made entirely of her own garbage. Sean was in the loop now. He sent a reply to their attorney pointing out that my complaint wasn't public defamation, it was formal notice of misconduct, backed by documentation and submitted through appropriate channels. And here's where it got real fun. A few days after that, I got a knock on the door. It was Frank. Frank was one of the quieter board members, older guy, retired engineer, mostly kept to himself. I'd seen him at meetings before, always nodding along, rarely saying much. You could tell he hated drama, but didn't want to rock the boat either. He looked nervous, like he wasn't even sure why he was there. "I read your letter," he said, standing just outside my porch like he wasn't sure if stepping inside would violate some clause. I didn't know about the wedding van, or the old policy draft. I didn't say anything, I just waited. She never brought it to the board, said it was updated. We trusted her. That stung a little, not because I expected anything different, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. The board wasn't evil, just asleep at the wheel. Karen had the keys and they let her drive wherever she wanted. "I'm not here officially," he said, "but if there's more, I'd like to see it." So I showed him. I laid it all out. The spreadsheet, the letters, the photos. I even printed out the Instagram frame of the wedding van with the caption, "So happy for Karen's daughter," complete with heart emojis. Frank just shook his head. She said it was a short stay, that it didn't need registration because it was a family event. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I take my son camping for 2 days in a rental car and get fined. She parks a party bus for a week and calls it family values. He didn't answer, but the look on his face said everything. That night, I updated the board complaint again and included a transcript of our conversation. It wasn't explosive, but it was movement, and I could feel Karen starting to lose her grip. She didn't back down, that's not who she was, but she started to overplay. That's the thing about control freaks. They're great when everything's going their way, but the second the structure starts to shake, they tighten the screws too hard. They think more pressure will hold it together, but it just speeds the cracks. I started getting emails from residents, quiet ones. "Saw your letter, thank you. Had no idea about any of this. Let me know if there's anything I can do." A few brave souls started speaking up at meetings. Not outright rebellion, but questions. The kind that start polite and end with people murmuring in the back row. Karen tried to push back with more fines, more letters. She accused me of creating disorder, of encouraging neighbor hostility. She said I was undermining community cohesion. That one actually made me snort coffee out my nose, because the only thing I was undermining was her, and she knew it, but she wasn't done swinging. One morning, I found a notice taped to my front door, this one marked urgent in bold red letters. It said the HOA board was reviewing my conduct and considering a hearing for potential suspension of community privileges. What that actually meant, I had no idea. Apparently, if Karen had her way, I wouldn't be allowed to use the pool, rent the clubhouse, or, and I swear this was real, attend social gatherings hosted by the HOA. That last one made me laugh, like I was just dying to go to another potluck with soggy pasta salad and a karaoke machine from 1997. But the wording was aggressive. It was supposed to rattle me, isolate me, make me look like a pariah. Instead, it did the opposite, because that same day, Frank sent me a text. "You're not crazy. This isn't right. I'm going to speak up." And he did. At the next board meeting, the same one Karen tried to use to formally sanction me, Frank stood up and laid it all out. He didn't yell. He didn't attack. He just read the facts. The original policy, Karen's van. The timeline of her rule changes. The documentation I'd submitted. The quiet in that room was suffocating. You could hear people shift in their chairs. Papers rustled. Someone actually gasped when he read the line about her signing the old policy herself. Karen looked like she was chewing glass, and when she tried to speak, Frank cut her off. Politely, firmly. "With all due respect, Karen, you've had the floor for years. It's time the rest of us took a look at things." People clapped, not everyone, but enough. That's when I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The plan was working. The truth was leaking through the cracks she'd spent years trying to seal shut. And for the first time since this whole mess started, she wasn't in control of the narrative. I was, but this wasn't over. Not yet. Because next, the spotlight was going to get a whole lot brighter, and Karen had no idea what was coming. It's wild how fast things can unravel once the mask slips. Karen had spent years building herself into this ironclad figure, the sensible, civic-minded, clipboard-toting matriarch of the HOA. The person you didn't always like, but trusted to keep the grass mowed and the gates locked and the riffraff out. But people forget that trust only holds as long as no one looks too closely. And suddenly, everyone was looking. After that board meeting where Frank finally called her out, I didn't need to keep knocking on doors. People started coming to me. Quietly at first, cautiously, but with more courage than before. One woman I barely knew handed me a thumb drive after walking her dog. Said her husband had saved every email from Karen since 2017, including one where she threatened to fine them for visual clutter because their recycling bins were visible for 6 minutes after pickup day. Another neighbor, a guy who always wore cargo shorts and never said more than hey, told me Karen had once ordered him to remove a child's drawing taped inside his front window because it lowered the community's presentation standard. And the best part? People had receipts, screenshots, photos, time-stamped letters, you name it. I compiled everything into a new document. No rants, no emotional tirades, just cold, boring, beautiful evidence. Item by item, violation by violation. Side-by-side comparisons of her actions versus the rules she claimed to be enforcing. A full section just on the van, with the photo, the Instagram post, and a copy of the parking policy she herself had approved. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I sent the whole thing to the local news. There's a small paper in our town, one of those local outlets that mostly run stories about high school soccer and lost cats and bake sales. But every now and then, they sink their teeth into something juicy. I kept the email simple, attached the file, gave them my name, told them they could quote me, told them I had backup. I figured it would take a while, maybe they'd ignore it, maybe they'd bury it. They didn't. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store when my phone buzzed. Friend of mine sent a screenshot of the article, headline, in bold, HOA president accused of abusing power, fining residents over phantom violations. Subheadline, leaked documents and board testimony suggest HOA president selectively enforced policies, ignored written bylaws. And right under that, a photo of Karen smiling at last year's spring planting day, holding a trowel like it was a scepter. It was surreal. I bought 2 copies of the paper, one for myself, one for Susan, and left the store with a smile I hadn't felt in months. That afternoon, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded. Comments started rolling in fast. At first, some folks defended her. I'm sure there's more to the story. Karen has always been professional with me, but then people started sharing their stories. Little things they'd brushed off, violations they'd swallowed, times they'd been made to feel like criminals for moving a trash can too slow or hanging a flag on the wrong hook. By the end of the day, the tide had turned. The post about the article was the most liked and shared thing in the group's history. I know because someone screenshotted it before the moderators, Karen's friends, tried to delete it. Didn't matter. It had already been reshared to other local groups, neighborhood watch forums, next-door threads. It was out there now, and it wasn't going back in the box. Then came the emails. Not to me, to the board. The HOA's general inbox got flooded with resident demands. People wanted answers. Some were polite, some were furious, some were just tired. Tired of the pettiness, tired of being policed for living in their own damn homes. The board had no choice. They called an emergency meeting. But this one wasn't held in the rec center. It was held in the community high school gym. They needed more space. I showed up early and sat in the back. Didn't want to look like I was leading some sort of rebellion. I just wanted to watch. Let it play out. But the room filled up fast. Folding chairs everywhere, people standing against the walls. Some even brought their own camp chairs like they were expecting a show. And it was a show. Karen walked in like nothing had changed. Blouse pressed, binder in hand, that same tight-lipped smile that had once meant authority. But this time, people didn't look at her the same. They didn't nod. They didn't wave. They stared. The board opened the meeting with a statement. Frank read it. Calm, steady, no drama. He explained the complaints, the evidence, the media exposure. Said the board had reviewed the governing documents and found multiple discrepancies between current enforcement and original policy language. He said the board had voted to suspend all fines related to the disputed vehicle violations pending legal review. And then, the moment. He announced a motion to formally remove Karen Whitmore as acting president of the HOA, effective immediately, citing breach of fiduciary duty and failure to operate within the established bylaws. It wasn't just symbolic, it was real. Karen stood there, blinking like she'd just been slapped by a ghost. She tried to speak. I think we need to... But the crowd was already shifting. People were standing, applauding, cheering. The board took a vote right there. 4-1 in favor of her removal. And the one no was Karen herself. It was over. She stood, pale and stunned, and walked out without saying another word. Someone opened the door for her. She didn't look at anyone. She just left, just like that. People clapped again. I didn't. I just sat there, letting it all settle in. Not because I wasn't happy. I was. But it wasn't the kind of happiness you celebrate with high fives. It was quieter, heavier, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Outside, a guy from the paper tried to interview me. I said no thanks. I didn't need the spotlight. I'd already won what mattered. The fines? Gone? The threat of legal action? Dropped. A letter was sent to every resident saying previous violations were being reviewed and refunds would be processed where appropriate. But the real victory wasn't on paper. It was the feeling in the air, the way people smiled differently now, stood a little taller, talked more freely, like the neighborhood was ours again, and not hers. The first weekend after it was all over, I rented a bright red Bronco. Not because I needed it, not because we had a trip planned, just because I could. Ethan walked outside, saw it in the driveway, and broke into a grin. "We back to Road Warrior mode?" he said. I smiled. "Something like that." We didn't go far, just took it for a long drive out past the edge of town, rolled the windows down, let the wind and the music do their thing. It felt good, not in a flashy, look-at-me way, more like finally stretching a leg that's been cramping for months. When we got back, there wasn't a fine on my door. No letter, no envelope, just a quiet house and a peaceful street. The new board president, Frank stepped up, ended up instituting a full policy review. They brought in an outside consultant, someone who wasn't tied to Karen or her crew, and rewrote the entire vehicle section from scratch. Clearer language, simpler process. No more nonsense about vehicular behavior. You register your car if it's going to be there long term. Weekend rentals? As long as you're parked legally, no problem. They even added a clause about temporary parking for family excursions and trips, which I'm pretty sure was a direct nod to what Ethan and I had been doing. Frank called me a few weeks after the vote, not as a board member, just as a neighbor. Said he appreciated how I handled it, that I didn't lose my mind or go scorched earth on everyone. Said he'd been on the fence for a long time, but didn't know how to push back without making things worse. I told him the truth. I didn't know either. I just knew I couldn't keep letting someone chip away at my life for no damn reason. That sometimes you hit a point where doing nothing is the bigger risk. He didn't argue with that. Karen didn't vanish, by the way. She didn't move out or get run out of town or anything dramatic like that. I still see her sometimes, walking her dog, standing at the edge of her yard, pretending not to glance my way. She's quieter now, not in that smug, simmering way, more like someone who touched a hot stove and finally believes it burns. We haven't spoken. I don't expect we will. And that's fine. I didn't go through all this to get an apology. I didn't want revenge. What I wanted, what I needed, was to reclaim a little space for myself. For my son. For our weekends, our driveway, our damn mailbox. I think the part that sticks with me most is how small it started. One fine, one envelope taped to a door, and how fast that spiraled into this full-blown battle over dignity and control and who gets to decide what your life looks like in the place you call home. Looking back, I don't regret a second of it. Not the stress, not the late nights at the kitchen table, not the uphill climb against someone who thought she had the system locked up. Because I learned something. You don't win these kinds of fights by yelling louder. You win by refusing to look away, by outlasting, by making the truth louder than the rules. And most of all, by remembering why you're fighting in the first place. For me, it was never about the Jeep, or the fines, or even Karen. It was about Ethan, about giving him a home where he could grow up knowing that standing your ground matters, that silence isn't always noble, that if something's wrong, you don't just let it happen because it's easier. He still asks about the Broncos sometimes, or the Mustang we rented once with the broken AU export and the radio stuck on country music. We laugh about it now. We joke about Karen sightings like she's some rare woodland creature. But every time I see that grin on his face when we pick out a new rental for the weekend, I remember what it felt like to almost lose that, and how damn good it feels knowing I didn't. So yeah, that's what happened. That's how I got in a full-scale war with my HOA over rental cars and walked away with my head high, my record cleared, and my driveway back. And if you're reading this because you're going through something similar, here's what I'll tell you. Document everything. Stand your ground. Trust your gut. And never, ever underestimate the power of a red Bronco in your driveway.